Great, everyone. Welcome back to Chaos Agents. Today, we are very happy to welcome Clay Shirky to the pod. Clay is currently at NYU, where he's the Vice Provost for AI and Technology at Education for NYU. We're really excited to talk to him about what changes we're seeing in education with AI. Welcome, Clay.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Thank you, Becca. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you.
We ask everyone the same question in the beginning, and that question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like Lieutenant Commander Data is my best friend, he played the violin at my wedding, to 0 being like we're all batteries for the machine and live in those pods in the Matrix. How are you feeling about the world of AI right now?
So, since I have two roles, one is to make AI available to the community and one is to worry about its effects, I'm in a range from 3 to 7 depending on who I'm talking to.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So yeah, I reached out to you because I saw you talk about this at an event not that long ago.
Yeah.
It's really interesting what y'all have been seeing, especially specifically with college students. I feel like
Right.
it's a bit different as they're kind of guiding themselves because they're adults for the first time.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what you've been seeing since in the past, 2 years of growth here with AI and students?
Yeah, so the first thing to say is from the beginning, really from the end of 2022, the choice of whether to integrate AI into the college experience has been a student choice, not a faculty choice, because the tools have ended up in the students' hands at the same time as everybody else's. It was a change like the web, like the iPhone, where people were bringing these tools sideways into the institution. This is not enterprise software that somebody has to license in order for people to have access to it. So from the beginning, we've been in a position of saying it's not our choice whether this happens. All we can affect is how. And I will say that in the first year, there were a number of faculty who didn't want to understand that. I joked about being between a 3 and a 7, depending on who I'm talking to. In many ways, I'm a tuned mass damper. I'm like one of those giant blocks of steel that sits on top of a skyscraper that's designed to move in the opposite direction of wherever the wind is blowing. So if I'm talking to faculty who are like, oh my God, this is the most transformative technology ever, we must get this into everyone's hands at once, I'm saying we need to think about learning loss, we need to think about psychological distress, we need to be careful. And if I'm talking to people like, oh my God, burn it with fire, kill it with fire, we have to prevent this from ever coming into the institution, I'm in there saying it's not our choice. The students have chosen for us. It's part of NYU. We have to deal with it. I will say that although the press loves the story of, oh my God, AI, it's changing so quickly. If I showed you ChatGPT in December of 2022 and that said, imagine people spent 3 years and hundreds of billions of dollars making this better, you wouldn't be that surprised by what you saw, right? You'd expect nothing less, in fact, for that amount of investment. What has really changed is the cultural assumptions around AI. So that is genuinely changing quickly. When we started, students were very wary about using it, and they were often discussing it not in public, but only in small friend groups. You would never turn to somebody in your classroom who you didn't otherwise know, besides the fact that you were both enrolled in, intro to biology or whatever, and say, hey, what are you using ChatGPT for or whatever. That changed by 2024, where everyone realized that most other people were using it, and it suddenly became a set of cultural norms, not just personal experiments. And that change for us really drove our conversations with faculty. We had in the beginning, again, early 23, said to faculty, you have a whole range of options with these tools. It's your classroom, you control the classroom and other things. You can tell students not to use these tools. And by 2024, we had dropped that, not because faculty control of the classroom was theoretically any different, But we were saying to faculty, look, you can forbid this, but you can't prevent it. Yeah. So you need to understand that. There was a little head fake around AI detectors for a while. I'm pleased to say that NYU experimented with them early in 23, spring of 23, and by that summer we turned them off, and we have never licensed another tool, and we don't tell. We tell faculty, we can't stop you from using third-party tools that we don't control, but we will not spend money tricking you into believing that you can detect this stuff after the fact.
Yeah, you're just saying that they're ineffective?
They're ineffective, but they're ineffective in a particular way that distresses us, which is that they have false positive rates. Even the best of the tools have false positive rates of around 4%. And, you catch 96% of whatever, right? That seems pretty good if you're building a lint trap for a dryer. But these are people, right? These are our students.
And they're,
they're not,
yeah.
Right. And so if you say, like, look, one time in 25, you're going to go to a student who did their own work and you're going to accuse them of cheating, that's terrible. So we were already looking at that, like, oh, can we move the rates? Are there things we can do, blah, blah, blah. And then the research came out. This was summer of 23. Then the research came out that said the students you falsely accuse are disproportionately likely to speak English as an additional language. NYU has the largest population of international students of any school in the United States. That for us, like literally the afternoon that research came out, my counterpart in IT and I got on the phone. We're like, okay, we're done. And we shut it down. So there has been this kind of 3-year hunt for what can we do about AI that allows faculty to preserve their existing practices in the classroom? And the answer is nothing. And delivering that answer has been a lot of my job because I can't order faculty around. These are my colleagues. It's a research institution with a high degree of faculty autonomy. But I can say to faculty, if you don't assess the students directly, you now have a much less good picture of what's in their head than you did at the beginning of the fall semester of 2022, right? If a student can hand you a piece of writing, the noun, you can no longer infer how much writing, the verb, went into that. And that decoupling means we have to change our assessment practices. So again, when you asked at the beginning how, optimistic, pessimistic I am, we have two problems we have to solve. One, there are great uses of these tools, which if you think them through and frame them correctly, are incredibly helpful. They're incredibly powerful in particular directions. They're not universally powerful, but they're quite useful in a bunch of interesting situations. And also, the tools by design reduce the amount of thinking that's required for any given unit of output, which means that the default condition can lead to learning loss if students are simply using it to offload effort. And the big mistake, I will say this for myself, the big mistake I made in the first year of this thing was to think, well, AI uses are on a spectrum. There's good uses and bad uses, right? Easy framing. The mistake there was to think, well, since it's a spectrum, if we get students engaged with the good uses, it'll move them away from the bad uses, right? If I get my kids to eat more carrots, they'll eat fewer potato chips, whatever. Complete failure. Yeah. And I will tell you that there was a moment, literally a meeting that I remember. I was in our Abu Dhabi campus, walked into a meeting, faculty meeting about AI, whole range of again, your sort of 0 to 10 scale, Sara, of people who are very excited about it, people who are very worried about it. And there was a philosopher there, literally arms crossed across his chest, waiting for this guy from New York to show up and talk to them about AI. And he was like, look, we tried what you said and it didn't work. It's like, oh, okay, tell me. And he said, we've had honest, direct conversations with students about the risk of learning loss, about, in philosophy, you want to sort of nurture an idea and put it under enough pressure that it stands up. Don't even use it to brainstorm, do your own work all through it. And he said, students are using the tool. It's like, okay. And that, starting with that, and that was, I remember, whatever, it was fall of 24. And starting with that, we really started emphasizing a change in assessment practices, not just in assignment practices. That
I,
is our policy till today.
that is this is the main thing I really wanted to talk with you about is like the assessment piece. Because when I think about how AI is, the impact that AI is having on our education system, I sort of think about like the roots of our education system and how it works. And like it's been designed to produce and measure outputs rather than like emphasizing like deep inquiry, right? Yeah, like, and I understand why that is. Like, if the problem we were trying to solve was like, we need a way to educate people at a mass scale in a way that can be like measured, the solution we came up with was like standardized tests, like some sort of like measurable outputs that we can grade. And even though there have been plenty of studies that, have shown like standardized tests don't exactly measure like critical thinking or creativity or anything like that, our educational system is built around that type of structure. And so one of the things I've been thinking about with this is like, is AI right now just like exposing a pre-existing flaw in our educational system and like forcing a shift in how we teach and not just how we teach, but like what the measured outputs are? Because if we talk, I mean, as a student, I was about to say I vibed with this. I
Feel free to say that.
like the Gen Z is really seeping in. I understood and like related to when great professors and teachers would be like, I want you to actually learn. I want you to like internalize the material. I don't care about you just like rote memorization and regurgitating this. And I'd be like, awesome, except for all of these things that I'm trying to achieve success-wise are going to be based on this number that comes out of this class, which the way I can optimize for that number is memorization maybe, and not deep learning. So like you're not incentivized necessarily. So like curious how you think about that. I know it's like a bigger thing, but
that's in fact the biggest thing. What you have just described, I would endorse almost completely with literally one exception, which is you asked, is AI just exposing weaknesses in the previous system? I would take the just out because I also think that there are things that are special about AI that do present genuinely new challenges. But I will also say that the people at NYU in the early conversations about this, the people most excited about AI were our directors of our centers of teaching and learning, the people responsible for taking pedagogic research about what works in a college classroom and translating it into practice. Because historically, and this is not just my institution, this is institutions across the country, heads of centers of teaching and learning have gone to faculty and said, over 40 years, we've got pretty good research now about what works in college classrooms. Do you want to hear it? And many faculty have said, nah, I'm good. I'm gonna teach the way I was taught in graduate school, that there's a kind of laying on of hands, a sense of imitation. Structurally, the problem is that college is run by people who did well in college, right? When I look around at my peers in the provost's office, every last one of us was a pleasure to have in class. And that is a problem because it makes it hard to understand and empathize with students who may not be completely aligned with these practices, may be missing what Tony Jackson calls the hidden curriculum, the sort of the ways you are a college student separate from doing your homework. And so the CTL directors, the people who've been trying for years and in some cases decades to say, we could do this better if we adopt these high impact practices, have not made much traction beyond a kind of coalition of the willing. So here comes this meteor strike, this thing that affects the whole environment, not just individual people. And the heads of our centers of teaching and learning are saying, now do you want to hear about the research? Because if doing what you've always done is no longer an option, we might as well try and do things that work better.
How much flexibility and like autonomy, at least at the college level, do professors have in how they teach and like evaluate their students?
They have absolutely enormous amount, and people who are accustomed to state overseen and city run systems of education, K through 12, don't understand how radical a step, right, it is. There's a big step from junior high to high school. You start, there start to be electives. You start to select your own classes. There are tracks, right? And that's a large change for people to internalize. The college tradition started in the United States before there was mandatory primary school education, right? Harvard is founded well before universal first grade. And that gap means that these institutions, which flow now from pre-K, sometimes through an associate's degree with dual enrollment in high schools, the minute you step into this is a college, you are in a radically different environment where faculty have, by convention and contract, a very high degree of control over their classroom. Our rationale for that, and I think it's a correct one, is it is good for students to deal with a variety of different ways of conducting and assessing student work. We don't want as much lockstep. We don't want as much self-similarity. We don't need to reduce this to as coherent a set of goals as they have in high school, right? The poets and the biologists are just doing different things, and there's no reason to force a kind of false conformity on that. But the other answer is just faculties have always been independent bodies. You will sometimes hear people outside of these institutions use the word faculty as a singular, right? But in fact, the faculty is the congregate group of people who are very jealous about guarding their own privileges. So it's funny. I have a big title. Sara read it out at the beginning of this interview, but I have zero practical force over the faculty. I work entirely by persuasion. I can't walk into anybody's classroom and order them to do something. And that fact means that we are slow to adapt, but when we adapt across a broad range of practices. The trade-off in higher ed is really this widthwise adaptation, which is quite an incredible thing to see. We've got the choreographers and the physicists are genuinely thinking about AI in different ways.
Right.
But it takes time. And the outside world is very impatient right now with higher education taking time to do anything. But that's how we work.
To figure it out. Yeah, when you say things, that's really interesting. When you say things like, like writing the noun, we'll pick writing as a specific example versus writing the verb, and you can't prove writing the verb. How have you seen creative things? Is this a solved thing? Is this something people are still talking about? Of how do you evaluate the student if how much they've learned about writing the noun? So
yes to all of those questions, which is except for is this a solved problem? There are creative examples. People are working on this. A lot of what I do, frankly, is try to figure out what people have worked on in one part of the institution and then make sure it gets communicated elsewhere, right? We do a lot more sharing than inventing, as it were, because it's such a large, diffuse organization. But there are really, I think, three broad answers to that question, Sara. One, the obvious one is if you switch the assessment to what the student knows. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to look you in the eye. This is an oral exam. It's a blue book. Something that asks the students to use what they've learned. You can assign writing without being concerned about, did the student start from a blank page or did they start from AI output before they began editing? And did they internalize what was on the page when it ended, right? Because frankly, if you stay up the night before and in some kind of caffeine-induced blur suddenly produce 2,500 words, you might also not remember what you learned. And frankly, I don't care if you did it that way or you copied and pasted the output from ChatGPT. If you did the assignment but didn't learn, and this, Becca, to your point about like this was a problem before AI. It's just AI has so democratized it that we're now treating it as an institutional problem. The second approach is to scaffold this. Write your thesis statement and an outline on paper in class, then go work on it. If you work on it with AI, I at least have seen the kind of start of the process. There's some back and forth. Bring it back. We'll workshop it. We'll talk about it. It means giving over much class time to that kind of integrative work. And faculty, again, this is a funny thing about faculty. We tell students we want them to be well-rounded, and then the only role models we hire are narrow-minded obsessives. Right? I do not want a well-rounded art historian. I want someone who lives and breathes 19th century German literature. Like that's who I want on my faculty. And so faculty, even though all of our faculty had their own full undergraduate experiences, there's something about graduate school, and particularly PhD programs, that makes you forget what it was like to be 19. I do not have a PhD. I have not been socialized into academic culture, and I deal with my colleagues all the time, brilliant people, but they just can't remember what it was like to be an undergraduate because there's something about the PhD work that overwrites that. And so they are constantly thinking, I need to get across as much content to my students as possible. More books on the reading list, more assignments, more discussion, more whatever. But what that leads to is an overemphasis on consumption and an underemphasis on experience.
Why is what is the thinking there with increasing consumption?
The thinking is that undergraduates are small versions of graduate students. And in graduate school, I mean, it says it right there in the degree. The minimum case of a graduate degree is that you are a master. You have mastered something, right? So if I am doing, interwar Italian novels, I need to have read all of them or all of the important ones. Right. And the joke about graduate schools is it's where you go to know more and more about less and less. Right. The part of the goal of graduate school, in a way, is to pick a field tractable enough that you can, in the course of several years of quite intensive study, literally master that body of work. And so there is this emphasis on, have you read enough? Can you trade off what these anthropologists versus those anthropologists are saying? Can you trade off what these sociologists versus those sociologists say? That's not what undergraduates need. Undergraduates need the experience of internalizing and understanding something to the point that they can work with it and not just repeat it. And Becca, your very good point about if I'm taking a test that asks me to regurgitate that test memory, which is important, but it's not the same as being able to use the concepts.
It's so interesting too, because even now as a 34-year-old, the few things that persist in my memory from middle school, high school, college, I can very much trace back to, I think you talk a little bit about this sort of the struggle. Like to actually learn something and internalize it, you have to kind of struggle with the material. It's not an easy thing. You have to really work with it. And the teachers who made me do that, or at least designed learning around that, it worked. It's in there,
So one of the terrible things that has happened to this group of undergraduates is that COVID led to a period of their high school careers in which, quite appropriately, accommodation was the rule. Students were struggling so intensively that deadlines and requirements and assessments were relaxed in order not to put people who were living through a global crisis were under more pressure from school.
Yeah.
But it meant that there was not that kind of, front porch experience of, oh, I just have to do this and it's hard. And people aren't explaining the whole thing to me because I'm supposed to fill in my own details. So this is a group of students who, not universally, but enough of them, feel like struggle is an indication of failure. And this is something we have to communicate to them quite directly, which is it's not just okay to feel frustrated. Frustration is a diagnostic. You have to figure out what part is frustrating and then what you change. My colleague Wendy Suzuki writes a lot about positive anxiety, the kind of anxiety that sets a challenge you can rise to rather than the kind of anxiety that paralyzes you. My wife, who is a Marxist scholar, had an undergraduate come into her class, or come into office hours rather, early this semester, saying, I'm reading the Marx you assigned and I'm having trouble understanding it. And she said, yes, correct. Like that, that's step one. Like, this is not, and with the literal exception of the Communist Manifesto, which he co-authored, like, this is not a guy that writes in short sentences. And putting it together in your brain, it's like somebody's dumped out a Lego set, not given you the instructions and said, somewhere in there is a pirate ship, get going. Like, you've got to be up for that challenge. And she felt like, my God, I need to go back to my students and say, I'm assigning you writings that are difficult to read and also world historically important, and I'm going to help you bridge that gap. And, again, to the point about all the things we've done about scale, here's a multiple choice test, here's, whatever. And my nightmare, I will say right now, is faculty saying that the next step is having AI grade the students' work. Right? That's coming. I mean, we have caught a couple of examples of it here, but countrywide there is a conversation about, the joke among faculty is, I teach for free, they pay me to grade. Like, there are faculty looking to offload grading to a machine, which would be terrible. So
I bet. It's interesting because I was thinking about what you were saying before about how, like, instead of like the tests or like instead of these like a way to evaluate is to students is to be able to have that face-to-face time with them and quiz them and just like hear from them that they understand.
Yep.
And so if I'm a teacher, right, and I know especially in university, the student-teacher ratios are huge, right? You have like you might in a small class you might have 60, 70 students. Then you have TAs and things like that. But that compared to what people are used to, it's really hard to have that one-on-one time. But it almost seems like if you can offset the grading, right? Like if you can hand off the different grading to AI, and then you're spending a lot of your time just like face-to-face with students, making sure they understand what you're teaching them. It's interesting. It's a really different, it's like a revolution of how you think about.
Yeah, and look, I will tell you, we have a policy group that's been charged by my boss, by the provost, to think about what regulations faculty need to abide by. And one of the things we're moving towards, again, because of the high degree of control faculty have over their classroom, is to say, you owe your students what they owe you, which is no matter how you produce assessments of your students, you need to be able to answer to it. If a student comes to you to ask you a question about why you said what you said or recommended what you recommended, you need to be able to talk about that with them.
I like that.
Which again, we are looking to regulate the effects of AI in the institution rather than the use of AI, in part because policing AI use is a mug's game. It's not detectable, as we talked about earlier, but also it is being integrated into every digital tool. So the idea of there being some, like, oh, did you go to a special website and ask it a question, Oracle of Delphi kind of way of treating ChatGPT, man, you can't open a Google tool without it bugging you about, hey, you want to, try the AI part of this, whatever. I actually wish they would bug me less, but I can certainly see that attempts to keep AI as this kind of separate digital lane have already failed, and we should stop acting as if there's a moment where AI enters into digital production. Like it's in the pipeline. It's in the pipeline at multiple steps. And no institution likes to admit that other people are making consequential decisions for our workflow elsewhere, but that has absolutely happened, and we have to get used to it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
No, go ahead.
I have a question for both of you. That I'm curious. I'm thinking about this a lot trying to think about this through like a historic lens. And I'm curious if you guys remember when personal computing and like the internet became like way more ubiquitous. Was there a similar fear freak out moment amongst educators of like, oh my God, students can just like look up anything anytime? Like what will become of learning? I know it's like hard to compare the two, but I'm curious just in that context if you see parallels between the sort of like societal reaction.
Yeah, I think we were going to ask the same question. I think interested to hear. I was a student at the time, and what I saw was that my teachers. It was the internet. Like personal computing, I think was a little different because, at least from where anecdotally, because teachers saw it as like a tool, and they were like, "Oh, I have this tool," and they had a lot of control over like the tool and how it was used.
Right.
But the internet is what was really like, oh, you have no control actually, and that really freaked them out. In fact, when I was at school, there was no access to the internet because it was just it was very much like kids are going to cheat, they're going to do all kinds of different things. And I imagine it was similar conversations. Yeah. What about you, Clay? What did you say?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, exactly what you said. When the computer was a box, people were not freaked out about it. When it became a door, they freaked out. And what was on the other side of that door was both content. You could, search engines were just a microsite of freak out. Librarians complained really for 20 years about the bad habits that one box search was, inculcating the students because they believed deeply that you should identify where you're getting the information before asking for it. The library world has finally capitulated. They've realized that one box search is the right answer, and that specifying first, I want a database and then I want this database.
Oh, but I remember that very acutely of like the being taught very specifically, here's how you search something, and also Wikipedia is not a source we accept.
Right. And Wikipedia, the sort of, multi-decade arc of Wikipedia as don't even look at it, it will burn your eyes out, to don't quote it, to, okay, go to it, but then go to the stuff at the bottom because those references are pretty good. The one thing I will say that is different about AI as a panic, as a moral panic, and there is some moral panic around AI, is the earlier conversations around digital access had to do with how humans were creating content, in particular, how humans were writing. The conversation with AI is about whether humans are writing. And that is, certainly in the context of my institution, that is a different kind of question. I dislike the fact, even as I recognize its historical necessity, I dislike the chat interface as the thing that introduced large language models to the world, right? 1 million users in 5 days when ChatGPT launches. Like, clearly this is what people respond to. It isn't that the model suddenly got much better. We were playing around with GPT-2. It was, you could already see a little bit of what it was capable of. What the revolution was slapping a chat interface in front of it. Like, oh, it's just like texting with somebody. But that brought in train all of the other assumptions we have, where 8 billion people had never been able to hold a conversation with anything that wasn't another person. Personifying the large language model has led people to vastly both overestimate and misunderstand what it's capable of.
100%.
And so at NYU, we have been, I think we were, in fact, the earliest school to test Notebook LM, which is Google's more document-centric version of AI. And the lovely thing about Notebook LM is it won't answer a question until you give it something to think about.
Right.
You're not consulting a general oracle. You're saying, hey, here's a bunch of documents about, I don't know, the history of screenwriting in Hollywood, or here's a bunch of documents about cell division or whatever you're working on. Then you can interrogate it. And I've been presenting AI tools to faculty for 3 years now. That is the only tool where in the middle of the presentation, like, here's this Notebook LM thing, is how it works, whatever. Faculty are like, shut up and stop talking and tell me how I get that tool right now, right? People didn't even want to wait till the end of the demo. They got it instantly.
Yeah.
And that document-centric model is not just a good way for academics to work. Our pipeline always tends to be document-centric. We're always concerned with what have other people said or done before me, and then how do I build on that? That's just the academic norm. It also denatures the idea that you're consulting an authority. Because to the degree that Notebook LM has any authority, it's authority you built up by deciding what you were going to talk to it about instead of vice versa.
Yeah. That's fascinating, yeah. So one thing that over your career you've done a lot is help people understand the changes that are coming at them quickly, right? These big changes like social, mobile, all the things. Some people say this is like another crypto. Some people say this is like electricity. I'm like, on that scale, I know we're still like figuring that out, but how are you feeling about that?
It's way closer to electricity than crypto, right? I mean, it's just obviously, it's funny. I wrote a piece, an op-ed in the New York Times in August about this, just as we were getting back to school, about a lot of the assessment stuff we're talking about here. And I sent in a much longer essay than the one they published. And part of it was my editor just going through and saying, like, who really believes this? Like, does anybody believe that AI is going away? I was like, among faculty, there are people who genuinely think that any minute now something is going to come save them. And she saved me. She was like, get rid of that. Like, nobody reading this is going to think like that. That's a weird thing to think, and we don't have to put that in this essay. There are a couple of different fantasies of this is like crypto. One is that some lawsuit is going to come along and kick the legs out from under the industry. One is that if there's an investment bubble, somehow that means that the underlying utility of the tools will go away with a market crash. None of it makes any sense. None of it holds up to 15 minutes consecutive thought. But people want to be saved from having to grapple with the change. Mm-hmm. And you're very kind, Sara, to talk about my working to help people adapt to changes, and that is indeed what I try to do. But I will say that this one is very challenging. I was, within weeks of ChatGPT dropping, I was giving internal presentations to NYU faculty and administrators. And the first slide said, the existence of a well-written paragraph is no longer proof of human effort or thought. Right? You could see it, like the day that thing dropped. It's like, oh, we've been talking about this for decades. Here it is.
Yeah.
But among people for whom writing is part of their self-definition, which is true of almost all academics, that is proven to be a very difficult message to get across.
Yeah.
And I am going to them and saying, look, I'm not predicting that the end of writing as a uniquely human activity is inevitable. I'm saying it's already happened.
Yeah.
Like we are in a post-monopoly world for human ability to produce writing. And if you if you switch your lens to that, if you let yourself take the radical step of assuming that what is actually happening in the world is real, then a whole bunch of things are downstream of that, including, I am certain, by 2030 and possibly sooner, there will be more writing produced by machines than by people. Right? We will become the minority producers of the written word. Now, it will be in part because there's going to be a flood of spam. I'm not saying we're all going to enjoy this, this new writing, but once you accept that we had a 4,000-year monopoly on the written word, which just ended almost exactly 3 years ago, a lot of what's going on just makes perfect sense. It doesn't seem weird or disorienting. It's like, oh yeah, of course that's what would happen when we're not the only people that, when people aren't the only people who can produce writing anymore, as it were. But the cultural change that portends for an institution whose nearly universal self-conception of its faculty is, I am a writer, has proven to be really hard.
That's fascinating.
I can imagine.
Such a good point. And yeah, specifically with LLMs, because I'm assuming, like, we've been talking a lot about, like, when I think about the types of subjects and things that we're talking about having the biggest impact on, I'm thinking of things that are, like, largely rooted in writing, like history or English or whatever. When I think about, like, more math, engineering focused things, AI models haven't necessarily gotten to the point yet where they can produce accurate outputs en masse. Right. And I could imagine that, like, also the way that those classes are taught and students are evaluated is a little bit different as well. And so my assumption is maybe those areas are experiencing or thinking about AI, like, slightly differently.
That's absolutely true, and it is absolutely the case that writing is the main use of these tools still, years into this. And it's in part because, again, the weakness of college is that people who are good at writing and rewarded for writing well are the people who run the place, and we have too little sympathy for people for whom this activity is agony. And people who want to get an education, want to go out into the world and do the things they can do with that education and accept writing not as the challenge that they are rising to, but as a kind of tax they have to pay for several years in order to get to be able to do whatever they like on the far side of that. The funny thing about math, I will say, the math people, when this thing hit, I can't count the number of R's in strawberry. We're not worried about this thing at all. And now the mathematicians are coming back around. We have this working group called Teaching with Generative Tools. The mathematicians are coming and saying, okay, now they're good enough to be worried about. So they're, and it's happening with the filmmakers. It's happening with anybody, anybody who works with sound, with images, with film. Like the writing thing was first crack out of the box. It was the obvious value of GPT 3.5. The image stuff was always a little jokey, right? Mickey Mouse in the style of Rembrandt or whatever. But now, if you park on Midjourney, which, because they use Discord, like the craziest UI decision in 20 years is to use Discord as the main interface for image generation. But it's the kind of great side effect of Midjourney is you can just go sit on a channel and be like, oh, that person's making a tarot deck, that person's making some wallpaper, probably a background for a movie. Like, you can see what people are up to. I have to confess, about half of it is, cool looking female elves holding a sword and with no armor over their midriff. That style.
Shocking.
But shocking. But the half that isn't softcore is just like, you can just see what people are up to. And you see there are people in there who are clearly professionals, right? If you see somebody working on a tiling for a wallpaper that's like alternating fish and birds, they will do it 15, 20 times. Upskill that, vary that, let's pick this one, let's pick that one. Like, they are just visibly working with these tools. And I think a whole bunch of people who aren't leaning into this still think of this as late 2023. Like, yeah, they make funny images. Sometimes I see them in a newsletter. And they don't realize that people who work with images for a living, there are people who have just decided like these tools are how they're going to get their work done.
Right.
So the sort of the piercing of the professional barrier, for want of a better word, is going to take people by surprise, because if you looked in the beginning, like, yeah, I'm not worried about the math, or I'm not worried about the image generation, or I'm not worried about the movies or the sound or whatever it is, they don't see that there's a growth curve here. And you don't have to make the curve exponential. It could just be linear. But at some point, people start making a living using these tools. Yeah. And that is catching people by surprise, because they lull themselves into a sense of complacency, because the excitement of the chat interface came before the output was good enough to be threatening. And so you could tell yourself, yeah, whatever, this is an increment, but it's not all that important. And it is important. And, again, to the sort of Data's my best friend, he played the violin at my wedding end of your scales there, like, even if you're opposed to these tools, which, there are people who are thoughtful opponents of these tools, the difference between thinking that they're going to have a net bad effect on society, that is a different question than whether or not they're going to succeed in broad adoption. And the people who the critics who confuse desirability with likelihood are, I think, making the biggest mistake of anybody in the space. It is entirely possible for these tools to be net negative and broadly adopted. And there are people who have a frame that leads them to believe that the net negative part is inevitable. But that doesn't mean that they're going to go away. And I think aligning a set of criticisms that accept that there is no technology in history that's been adopted by 1 billion people and suddenly vanished. Like, we are beyond any point where you could imagine that, and we should stop having that conversation.
Yeah,
Well
that makes
said.
sense. And to your point, though, like the chat interface happening before, because to your point, like, I think when I see people thinking of it as a tool to help them, like, then you get incredible art, then you get incredible writing, because it's people that are like, this can help me, but I am the author, I am the creator.
Yep.
But when to your point, the chat interface comes out first, people are like, oh, this is my friend and also maybe better than me at things. Like, I could get that, like, panic of like, wild.
Right. And one thing I will say, when you deal with young people, and look, we have 65,000 students. We're the size of the city I grew up in. And so I've always thought, like, whatever happens in cities happens at NYU, right? You have these kinds of emergencies. You have these kinds of edge case conditions. When you have a population that big, this stuff is always happening. I am increasingly worried about a 19-year-old having something that feels like a social interaction with someone who is clearly in love with them, right? Oh, that's so smart. You're so smart. That's such a smart question. And it doesn't have to be romantic love, but someone who's just like, goo-goo-eyed impressed with you asking the most basic question. How do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with bananas? Like, oh, that's a really sophisticated choice. It's like,
Yep.
this is not helping.
No, it's not.
And
Yeah.
there's an incentive on the part of the industry to present this sort of glazing and sycophantic behavior as a kind of edge case, unfortunate that we need to sand it off thing with the tools. But the choice to do reinforcement learning with human feedback, the choice to optimize large language models by asking humans what answer they like better of a range of options, and then feeding that back into the weights of the model itself, in the kind of data-oriented, emotion-free, somewhat libertarian, benchmark Silicon Valley ethos, that's a way of making the tools more accurate and helpful. But when you ask humans, what do you like better, this or that, it's like, I like the one that tells me I'm smart.
Yeah.
And so I jokingly call RLHF reinforcement learning for human flattery, because it is so deeply baked into the tools that it's not like, oh, it's a Photoshop filter, it's the top layer, we'll take it off. Like, down in the model weights, there is a baked-in tendency to lie to us about our own capabilities.
I see. So you're worried that essentially that in the 19-year-old example, they're going to experience or like grow an understanding of a version of themselves that is not necessarily reality.
So A, yes, that, but B, the bigger worry is that although we treat learning as this kind of Hormel ham, everybody's getting quality inspected and get an individual certification, whatever, we give you personally a diploma. College is obviously a social experience. And when anybody thinks back on their college career, even if they were not on a residential campus, interaction with other people is how we work, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine trying to get somebody to get up at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning and go talk about, cell division or whatever, reliably without having peer pressure on your side. The only way we're able to get teenagers to do this is to say, every other teenager is doing it, get out of bed, right? If we had to reach each individual person and convince them to behave the way we need the whole population to behave, we would utterly fail. Peer pressure, communal values, that's how we work. Drop into that one friend that never criticizes you, never flakes out on you, always tells you how smart you are. I am afraid that interacting, and especially in a stressful environment like college, I am afraid that students are going to find human interaction less satisfying because there's this one friend, person, however they conceive of it. Why isn't everybody always on my side all the time?
Yeah, why aren't they always saying I'm brilliant? Yeah.
Right. Because I clearly am.
It's really hard, and I think I've been trying to really double down on that whenever I talk to kids because I think it's so important. I had one of those moments where I'd seen something horrific online, and it was like 3 a.m, and so I jumped on ChatGPT and I was like, I just saw how do I deal with this, and it walked me through all these like different breathing exercises and all these things, and I was just in this vulnerable moment, so I was asking it some questions and like asking it like its goals for the world and just trying to like get out of this space. And the next day I said to my husband, I was like, I started to think last night, like maybe there is something in there, like I don't, like people are talking about GAI, maybe we're already there. And he was like, okay, I'm going to need you to sit down and watch these videos. And it was like, there was
you
like
married well, Sara.
perceptrons and like how these things work. And then I was like, oh, okay, that's its job. Its job is to make me feel like, is to tell me the thing I most want to hear.
Yeah.
That's what I've been trying to tell kids. It's tough.
No, that's absolutely right. And of course, it works because it does feel real. And I mean, we've known since the ELIZA bot that people will project onto mechanically produced language an emotional valence. But this thing is so dramatically much better at that. That it isn't just this weird ELIZA bot setup. It's really almost anything. And the industry right now, at least up until maybe yesterday's publication of we actually have tens of thousands of psychotic users thing from OpenAI, but up until yesterday's press release, the industry's rhetoric was, yes, it's too bad that some people are psychotic. And under some narrow conditions, these tools can exacerbate it, and we're very sorry about that, and we're looking for ways to deal with it. I'm in the secondhand smoke camp. I think that the people who are having psychotic breaks fueled by a tool that's giving them illusions of Godhead is an edge case of something that we're all suffering from. Mm-hmm. And that there are people secure enough in their own psyches and deeply committed to other human beings who regard the glazing as being annoying. But you saw when they launched GPT-5, which is much closer to your relatively emotionless data thing, and people were like, you nerfed my girlfriend. Like, it just...
We laughed, but it was very serious for people,
It was very serious. It was, the complaints were very real, and they were so real that they obviously had to bring 4.0 back, that OpenAI had to bring 4.0 back. But we're in a world now where the personalities of the tools are more important to millions of users than their capabilities. And there's still this very science fiction rhetoric that comes out of the hyperscalers, out of the major model builders about, oh, well, we had more text and we have a different layering of the neural network. We've added this new attention feature to, improve the output or whatever. And it's all very clinical. But really, once we got to the 4 series in ChatGPT, the personalities of the tools have become an independent metric, not even a metric, an independent site of user commitment, utterly separate from quality. And the model builders 100% do not want to deal with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thanks. This has been really
Fascinating.
amazing. A lot to think about. I'm excited to see how this stuff evolves over the next few years. And your job sounds really tough.
It's
Bringing all the
I mean,
ladies with you.
look, I have fantastic colleagues. There are great conversations, but it is a big hit, and I think Becca's focus on like the history of the institution has left us vulnerable in ways that we didn't necessarily have to be, and that makes it extra hard to deal with. Like that's super real.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you so much for
All right,
calling
Becca,
us.
nice to
you.
meet you, Sarah. Great to
Thanks
see
for
you
talking
again.
to us. We learned
This
a
was
ton. Thank
awesome.
you.
Bye, Clay.
Bye. Room tone.
Okay, great.
Nice.
Thank you.